In the village of Dembesa, where the baobab trees stretched their thick arms to the sky and the rivers whispered secrets to the wind, there lived a hunter named Bomo. He was young, strong, and quick-footed, with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. His father had been a great hunter before him, and his grandfather before that. In Dembesa, hunting was not just a skill, it was a way of life. Yet, despite his skill, Bomo had never once returned home with an animal. Each morning, before the sun kissed the earth, Bomo would leave his mother's hut with his bow and quiver full of arrows. The other hunters of the village, Mandla, Jafari, and Ojero, would see him disappear into the bush, and they would nod with respect. They had seen him track an antelope for hours without making a sound, seen him vanish into the trees like a spirit. Yet, when the hunters returned at dusk, their shoulders heavy with their kills, Bomo's hands were always empty. "Oh, perhaps he is cursed," some villagers whispered. Others laughed, shaking their heads. What kind of hunter never kills? But there was something even stranger than Bomo's empty hands. Despite never bringing home a single animal, his mother, Mama Kisa, always had meat in her pot. When people passed by her hut, the rich aroma of roasted game filled their noses. Her stew was thick and flavorful, the kind that made a man sigh with satisfaction. "Where does the meat come from?" they asked her. Mama Kisa only smiled, stirring her pot. "A mother must feed her son," she said. The villagers did not press further. No one could explain it, and so they let it be. One day, the village chief, Obadil, called for a great feast. He wanted every hunter to bring his finest catch, so the people could eat and celebrate. Mandla, Jafari, and Jero each carried large antelopes, their skins glistening in the sun. Even the youngest hunters brought in bush rats and guinea fowls. But when Bomo arrived, his hands were empty, as always. This time, the chief did not ignore it. He turned to Bomo and asked, "How long have you been a hunter?" "5 years, chief," Bomo replied. "5 years," the chief repeated, his voice thoughtful. "And yet, in all this time, no one has ever seen you bring back a single kill." He folded his arms across his chest. "And yet, your mother's pot never runs dry." The villagers murmured in agreement. "Tell us, Bomo," Chief Obadil said, his eyes narrowing. "Where do you get your meat?" Bomo did not answer immediately. He looked at the faces around him, some curious, some suspicious. He turned his gaze to his mother, who stood quietly by the fire, watching him. Finally, he spoke. "If you want the truth," he said, "then send your best men with me into the bush tomorrow." At dawn, Bomo set out with 3 of the best hunters, Jafari, Mandla, and Jero. They followed him deep into the forest, their bows ready. They walked for hours, stepping over the roots of ancient trees and pushing through thick, thorny bushes. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds, monkeys, and the rustling of unseen creatures. Suddenly, Bomo raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "There," he whispered, pointing. Through the trees, they saw a large kudu, its spiraled horns rising proudly from its head. It grazed peacefully, unaware of their presence. Jafari pulled an arrow from his quiver, but before he could knock it, Bomo shook his head. "Wait," Mandla frowned. "Why? It is a perfect kill." But Bomo ignored him. Instead, he crouched low and whistled, soft and melodic, like the wind through the reeds. The kudu lifted its head. Then, to the hunter's amazement, it walked toward Bomo without fear. It stood before him, its large eyes calm. Slowly, gently, Bomo reached out and ran his hand down the animal's neck. The hunters watched in stunned silence. They had seen men tame dogs, even birds, but never a wild animal. "You see," Bomo said softly, "I do not kill." Then, as if understanding something unspoken, the kudu turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Jafari's mouth fell open. How is this possible?" Bomo stood and faced them. "Since I was a child," he said, "I have understood the language of the animals. When I go into the forest, they come to me, but I cannot bring myself to harm them." Mandla's brow furrowed. "Then, how does your mother cook meat?" Bomo smiled. "Because kindness is repaid with kindness." He led them further into the trees, to a hidden grove where the forest opened up. And there, lying beneath the shade, were the bodies of animals, ones that had died of old age, or sickness, or wounds from predators. None had been hunted by man. "Nature provides," Bomo said. The animals that no longer belong to the living leave their bodies behind, and in return, I keep their young safe from hunters who take more than they need. The hunters were silent. They had never heard of such a thing. Finally, old Jero nodded. A hunter who does not kill, he murmured, stroking his beard. Perhaps we have been blind all this time. When they returned to Dembesa, the men told the villagers what they had seen. At first, many did not believe them, but Chief Obodil listened carefully, his wise eyes unreadable. After a long silence, he turned to Bomo and said, "You are not a hunter like the others, but you are a guardian of the forest. And that, too, is a gift." From that day on, Bomo was no longer called a hunter. Instead, the villagers called him the keeper of the wild. He never killed, and yet, he never went hungry. And in the years to come, the forest around Dembesa remained plentiful, because the animals knew that among the humans, there was one they could trust.